Hello. It's good to see you. Today we are going to be reading a story from this little book here. This is a vintage book. It's from quite a long time ago. We're going to be reading The Adventures of Pinocchio. And here we have a little naked Pinocchio running away. And here we see the shop. It's like a Dolly Parton wig. There was once upon a time a king, you will quickly exclaim. No, you are wrong. There was once upon a time a piece of wood. This wood was not valuable. It was only a common log like those that are burned in winter in the stove. I cannot say how it came about, but one day this piece of wood was lying in the shop of an old wood carver by the name of Geppetto. No sooner had Geppetto seen the wood than he beamed with delight and said to himself, "This wood comes at the right moment. It will just do to make a wooden puppet. And a wonderful puppet it will be. A puppet that will know how to dance and to leap like an acrobat." So Geppetto took his tools and set to work to carve his puppet. "What name shall I give him?" he asked himself. "I think I will call him Pinocchio." Now that he had found a name, he began to work very hard. First he made the hair, then the forehead, then the eyes. When the eyes were finished, imagine Geppetto's astonishment when he saw that they moved and kept staring at him. You see, I would have stopped right there. Nope. Geppetto said angrily, "Wicked wooden eyes, why do you look at me?" There was no answer. So he carved the nose, but no sooner had he finished it than it began to grow until it had become an immense nose. The mouth was not yet completed when it began to laugh and make fun of him. "Stop laughing," said Geppetto, provoked. The mouth stopped laughing, but put out its tongue as far as it would go. Geppetto pretended not to see and went on to fashion the chin, then the throat, the shoulders, the stomach, the arms, and the hands. The hands were scarcely finished when Geppetto felt his wig snatched from his head. He looked up, and what did he see? There was his wig in the puppet's hands. "Pinocchio, give me back my wig immediately." But Pinocchio put it on his own head and was nearly smothered. Oh, there he is. "You rascal," Geppetto exclaimed. "You are not yet completed, and already you show lack of respect to your father." The legs and the feet remained to be done. When the old man had finished the feet, he received a kick on his nose. With a sigh, he took the puppet and placed him on the floor. No sooner had he done this than Pinocchio began to run about the room. Then suddenly he jumped into the street and escaped. Poor Geppetto rushed after him, but that rascal Pinocchio ran away like a hare. Stop him, shouted Geppetto. But the people in the street stood still and laughed until they held their sides. At last a police carabinier arrived. He planted himself in the middle of the road and managed to seize the fleeing Pinocchio. He brought him back to Geppetto, who took the puppet by the collar, threatening, "We will square our accounts at home, never doubt it." At these words, Pinocchio threw himself on the ground and would not take another step. In the meanwhile, people began to gather around them. "Poor puppet," said several. "He is right not to want to return home. Who knows how badly Geppetto will beat him?" They argued so much that the carabinier at last set Pinocchio at liberty and conducted Geppetto to prison. While poor Geppetto was being taken to prison, that imp Pinocchio ran home as fast as his legs would carry him. Once there, he threw himself on the floor with a great sigh of satisfaction. Suddenly he heard someone saying, "Creak, creak, creak." Pinocchio turned around and saw a big cricket crawling up the wall. "Who are you?" asked Pinocchio. "I am the talking cricket," came the answer, "and I have lived in this room 100 years and more." "But now this room is mine," said the puppet, "and if you want to do me a favor, go away at once." "I will not go," answered the cricket, "until I have told you a great truth." "Tell it and be quick about it," yelled the naughty Pinocchio. "Woe to those boys who rebel against their parents and run away from home. They will never come to any good in the world, and sooner or later they will repent it." "Sing away, cricket. I have made up my mind to run away tomorrow, because if I remain, I shall be sent to school, and I don't want to learn." "Poor little fool, don't you know that you will grow up a perfect donkey then, and then everybody will laugh at you?" "Hold your tongue, wicked croaker," shouted Pinocchio. "Poor Pinocchio, I really pity you." "Why do you pity me?" "Because you are a puppet, and you have a wooden head." At these words, Pinocchio jumped up in a rage, and snatching a hammer, he threw it at the talking cricket. Perhaps he never meant to hit him, but unfortunately the hammer struck him exactly on the head, so that the poor cricket was flattened against the wall, without even enough breath to cry a last cree, cree, cree. That's sad. The next morning, Pinocchio was awakened by his father, who had come back from prison and found the door locked. "Open the door," shouted Geppetto angrily. Pinocchio, who had been sleeping by the burning hearth all night, opened his eyes and answered, "I am coming." But when he wanted to get up, he fell down to the floor, discovering with a shock that his feet had been burnt off by the flames of the hearth. Oh, his feet are gone. "Open the door," raged Geppetto. "I cannot, Papa," cried the puppet. "My feet are burnt." "Open the door, I tell you," repeated Geppetto, who thought this was only another trick that Pinocchio was playing on him. "I cannot stand up, believe me," cried Pinocchio. So Geppetto was forced to climb through the window, scolding all the while. When he saw Pinocchio lying on the floor and really without feet, big tears ran down his cheeks, and he said, sobbing, "My little Pinocchio, how did you manage to burn your feet?" "I don't know, Papa. I returned home yesterday night, and I put my feet on the brazier to dry them, and then you returned, and I found they were burned off. And I am always hungry, and I have no longer any feet. Ow!" After Geppetto had fed the puppet, Pinocchio began to cry again and to beg for new feet. But Geppetto said to him, "Why should I make you new feet? You would escape again. I promise you that in the future I will be a good boy, and that I will go to school and work hard." Although Geppetto tried to look stern, his eyes were full of tears. He did not say another word, but took his tools and set to work. In less than an hour, his feet were finished, 2 little swift and well-knit feet. With a little glue, Geppetto fastened them in their places. As soon as the glue was dry, Pinocchio sprang down from the table and jumped about the room. "Now I will go to school at once," he cried. "Good boy," said Geppetto. "But for school I shall need a spelling book." "You are right, but where shall I get one?" "That is quite easy," answered the puppet. "Buy it at the bookseller's." "And the money?" "I have none." "Neither have I," added the good old man sadly. But suddenly he put on his old coat and ran out of the house. He returned shortly, holding in his hand a spelling book. "And the coat, Papa?" asked Pinocchio. "I have sold it. But it is snowing outside." Shivering in his shirt sleeves, the good old man insisted that he thought it was too hot. Ooh, a theater. As soon as it had stopped snowing, Pinocchio set out for school with his spelling book under his arm. As he went along, he heard in the distance music that sounded like fifes. He stopped and listened, wondering whether he should go on to school or not. Finally, the young rascal decided that he would go to school tomorrow and that he would go to hear the fifes now. Here he is in his little shirt. Arriving in the middle of a square quite full of people, he found a great puppet theater that was painted in 1,000 colors. "How much does it cost to go in?" he asked. "2 pence," was the answer. Pinocchio, who itched with curiosity, lost all control of himself, and without any shame he asked a hawker of old clothes if he could get 2 penny for his jacket of flowered paper. The man laughed at him, but with a shrewd look in his eyes he said, "I will buy your spelling book for 2 pence." Pinocchio agreed at once, without even thinking of poor old Geppetto, who was trembling with cold because he had bought his son a spelling book in exchange for his warm old coat. So there he goes with the book, and Pinocchio looks like he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt and Robin Hood's hat. Oh, what now? When Pinocchio came into the puppet theater, Harlequin and Punchinello were quarreling on stage. All at once, Harlequin stopped and pointed to someone in the audience. "Do I dream or am I awake? That must be Pinocchio." "It is Pinocchio," shouted all the puppets in chorus. "Pinocchio, come on up here," cried Harlequin. At this invitation, Pinocchio made a leap and jumped upon the stage. But the public, angry that the play was stopped, shouted, "Go on with the play! Go on with the play!" At that moment, out came Fire Eater, the showman. He was very big and ugly, and he carried a large whip. At his sudden appearance, there was a deep silence. No one dared to breathe. The poor puppets trembled like leaves. "Why did you interrupt the performance in my theater?" he thundered, and he seized the frightened Pinocchio and threw him across the theater, where he landed against the wall with the tail of his shirt caught on a nail. As soon as the play was over, Fire Eater sent Harlequin for Pinocchio, who still hung on his nail, not even daring to move. Now, Fire Eater had not really a bad heart, and when Pinocchio was brought before him, struggling and screaming, "I will not die! I will not die!" he felt very sorry for him. You should know that, whereas normal people weep when they feel miserable, Fire Eater used to sneeze. And although the rugged showman tried not to show his emotions, he could hold out no longer, and he sneezed violently. Harlequin, who was quick to notice this, whispered cheerfully in Pinocchio's ear, "Good news, brother." Fire Eater, still acting the ruffian, shouted to Pinocchio, "Have done crying. Your sobbing gives me pains in my stomach." And he sneezed again. "Achoo! Achoo!" "Bless you," said Pinocchio. "Thank you. Now tell me, are your papa and mamma still alive?" "Papa, yes. My mamma I have never known." "Poor old father of yours. What would have become of him without you? Achoo! Achoo! I have compassion for him." Pinocchio, who understood that he was saved, ran at once toward Fire Eater, and climbing like a squirrel up his beard, he gave him a kiss on his big nose. "Then pardon is granted?" he asked. "Pardon is granted," answered Fire Eater. At this good news, all the puppets ran to the stage, where they began to leap and dance for happiness. After a while, Fire Eater called Pinocchio and asked him about his father. When he learned that old Geppetto was a poor wood carver who did not have a penny to his name, he sneezed again and gave Pinocchio 5 shining gold pieces to take to his father. You can understand that Pinocchio thanked the showman 1,000 times, and after he had bid farewell to all the puppets, he cheerily set out to return home. Pinocchio had not gone far when he met on the road a fox who was lame in one foot and a cat who was blind in both eyes. The fox leaned on the cat, and the cat was guided by the fox. They both greeted Pinocchio politely and told him that they had seen his father at his door, shivering in his shirt sleeves. Pinocchio proudly announced that in the future his father would shiver no more, and he was now a rich gentleman. "A rich gentleman? You?" exclaimed the fox, and both he and the cat began to laugh rudely. Pinocchio, who did not like to be laughed at, showed them the golden sovereigns. At the clink of the money, the fox stretched out a paw, and the cat opened wide 2 eyes, but shut them again before Pinocchio could observe it. "How would you like to multiply your money?" asked the fox suddenly. "In what way?" inquired Pinocchio. "That is easy enough," answered the fox. "Instead of returning home, you must go with us to the land of owls. There's a field called the Field of Miracles. All you need to do is bury your money, and in 20 minutes up will grow 5 trees loaded with golden sovereigns." "No, I will not go," said Pinocchio. "I will return home to my papa, who is waiting for me." "Well," said the fox, "go then, and so much the worse for you." "Think well, Pinocchio," warned the cat. Bewildered at the idea of so much money, Pinocchio asked, "Suppose I buried my 5 sovereigns in that field, how many should I find there the following morning?" "Multiply 500 by 5, and you will find 2,500 gold pieces the following morning." "Oh, how wonderful!" cried Pinocchio. "I will keep 2,000 for myself, and the other 500 will be for you." "What are you dreaming of?" said the fox. "We do not work for filthy gain. We only work to enrich others." "What good people!" thought Pinocchio, and forgetting all his good resolutions, he said to the fox and the cat, "Let us be off at once. I will go with you." They walked and walked and walked until toward evening they arrived dead tired at the Inn of the Red Crawfish. Here the fox decided they ought to take a rest, and sitting down for dinner, the cat and the fox convinced each other that they should at least eat a little something. So they ordered, with pretended modesty, partridges, fat chickens, rabbits, lizards, a hare stuffed with frogs, and many other delicacies. And while complaining that the doctor kept them on such a strict diet, they ate more than Pinocchio could possibly eat in a whole month. Besides, the puppet could only think about the Field of Miracles and was too excited to eat. After dinner they took to their rooms, ordering the innkeeper to call them at midnight so that they might continue their journey. While Pinocchio was dreaming about trees laden with gold, the host knocked at his door to tell him that midnight had struck. Asking for his companions, he learned that they had already left. As payment for his dinner and that of the fox and the cat, the innkeeper took one of his golden sovereigns. Sad over his misfortunes, Pinocchio left, still determined to go on to the Field of Miracles. Outside the inn it was pitch dark, so that he had almost to grope his way. Not a leaf moved. Only some night birds brushed his nose with their wings as they passed, which frightened him so much that he shouted, "Who goes there? Who goes there?" As he was walking along, he saw a little insect shining on the trunk of a tree. "Who are you?" asked Pinocchio. "I am the ghost of the talking cricket," answered the insect. "What do you want with me?" asked the puppet. "I want to give you some advice. Go back and give to your poor father the 4 sovereigns that you have left. By tomorrow my papa will be a rich gentleman, for those 4 sovereigns will have become 4,000. Don't trust those who promise to make you rich in one day. They are either mad or rogues. Listen to me. Go back." "On the contrary, I am determined to go on." "The hour is late, the night is dark, and the road is dangerous," warned the talking cricket. "I am determined to go on." "Remember that boys who are bent on having their own way sooner or later repent it." "Always the same advice. Good night, cricket." Good night, Pinocchio, and may heaven preserve you from dangers and assassins." As he went along, Pinocchio thought to himself, "I have never believed in assassins. Besides, I think that they have merely been invented by papas to frighten boys who want to go out at night." Uh-oh. Oh, he's going to get chased by something. Two things. But he did not have time to finish his reasoning, for at that moment he heard a rustle of leaves behind him, and he saw in the gloom two evil-looking black figures enveloped in charcoal sacks. He shuddered, and, not knowing where to hide his gold pieces, he put them in his mouth under his tongue. Then he tried to escape, but suddenly he felt himself seized, and two horrid voices said to him, "Your money or your life." Pinocchio could not answer because of the money in his mouth, so he made 1,000 frantic gestures to show the two muffled figures that he had not a penny in his pocket. "Less nonsense and out with the money," cried the two scoundrels. Well, they have a familiar look, don't they? "I have got none," the puppet tried to explain. "We will kill you and your father too." "No, no, not my poor papa," cried Pinocchio, and the sovereigns clinked in his mouth. "You rascal, you have hidden your money under your tongue. Spit it out immediately." Trying to free himself, Pinocchio caught the hand of one of the thieves, bit it off, and spat it out. Imagine his astonishment when, instead of a hand, he saw that he had spat out a cat's paw. Encouraged by this victory, he liberated himself, and jumping the hedge by the roadside, he began to fly across the countryside. The assassins ran after him, and they kept close behind. At daybreak, they were still pursuing him. Suddenly, Pinocchio found his way barred by a wide, deep ditch. With a great leap, he sprang to the other side. The assassins also jumped, but splash, splash, they fell into the very middle of the ditch. Laughing, Pinocchio shouted out, "A fine bath to you, gentlemen assassins," and he felt convinced that they were drowned. But when he turned to look, he saw that they were still running after him, with the water dripping from their sacks. Turning his eyes desperately in every direction, he discovered a small house in the distance. He started running for his life again, and finally arrived breathless at the door and knocked. No one answered. He knocked again while the footsteps of his persecutors grew louder. Suddenly the window opened, and a child with beautiful blue hair appeared at it. "In this house there is no one," she said, and shut the window. "Open, for pity's sake," pleaded Pinocchio. And at that moment he felt himself seized by his collar, and the two horrible voices cried, "We are going to hang you." They tied his arms behind him, passed a running noose around his throat, and then hung him to the branches of a tree called the Big Oak. They sat down on the grass and waited for his last struggle. At the end of 3 hours, the puppet's eyes were still open, and his mouth was still closed on the gold pieces while he was kicking his feet in the air. Losing patience, they turned to Pinocchio and said, "Goodbye till tomorrow. When we come back, we hope that you will be obliging enough to be dead with your mouth wide open." And they walked off. While poor Pinocchio, suspended from the big oak, was more dead than alive, the beautiful child came to the window again. When she saw him, she was moved by compassion, and with her hands she clapped 3 times. At this signal there came a sound of flying wings, and a large falcon flew to the window. The gracious fairy, for you must know that the child with blue hair was a beautiful fairy who had lived in the wood for more than 1,000 years, ordered the falcon to free Pinocchio from the smothering noose and to bring him to her. Shortly afterward, the falcon returned with the poor puppet, and the fairy carried Pinocchio into a little room. Carefully she put him to bed, and having touched his forehead, she noticed he was in a high fever. Therefore, She dissolved a white powder in a tumbler of water, and giving it to the puppet, she said to him, "Drink it, and you will soon be cured." Pinocchio made a wry face, and he asked plaintively, "Is it sweet or bitter?" "It is bitter, but it will be good for you." "If it is bitter, I will not take it." "Drink it, and when you have drunk it, I will give you a lump of sugar to take away the taste." "Even so, I will not drink it," cried Pinocchio. "My boy, you will repent it." "I don't care." "Your illness is serious." "I don't care." "In a few hours the fever will take you into the other world." "I don't care." "Aren't you afraid of death?" "I would rather die than drink this bitter medicine." Suddenly the door swung open, and 4 black rabbits marched in with a little coffin on their shoulders. "What do you want with me?" cried Pinocchio. "We have come to take you," said the biggest rabbit. "To take me? But I am not yet dead." "Not yet, but you have only a few more minutes to live, because you refused to take the medicine that would cure you." "Oh, fairy, fairy!" the puppet began to scream. "Give me the tumbler at once. Be quick, please. I will not die." And taking the tumbler in both hands, he emptied it at a draught. "We must have patience," said the rabbits. "This time we made the journey in vain." And taking the little coffin on their shoulders, they left the room, grumbling under their breaths. A few minutes afterward, Pinocchio jumped down from his bed, completely well again. The fairy, seeing that he had regained his strength, said to him, "Now come and tell me how it happened that you fell into the hands of those assassins." Pinocchio told her everything, and after he finished his story, he thanked the fairy for her help. "What a good fairy you are, and how much I love you." "I love you too," answered the fairy, "and if you will remain with me, you shall be my little brother, and I will be your good little sister." "I would be glad to remain, but my poor papa, I should like to go and bring him the golden sovereigns to buy a new coat." "Go then," said the fairy, "but be careful not to lose your way. Take the road through the wood, and I am sure you will find him." Pinocchio set out, and when he came to the big oak, he saw 2 people walking toward him. Can you guess who they were? The fox and the cat, with whom he had been at the Inn of the Red Crawfish. "Why, here is our dear Pinocchio!" cried the fox. "How come you to be here?" "It is a long story," answered the puppet. "The other night, when you left me alone at the inn, I met with assassins on the road." "Assassins? Oh, poor Pinocchio, what did they want?" "They wanted to rob me of my gold pieces." "Villains!" said the fox. While they were talking, Pinocchio observed that the cat had lost her paw. So he asked, "What have you done with your paw?" The cat tried to answer, but became confused. The fox therefore said immediately, "My friend is too modest, and that is why she does not speak. In defending me from an old hungry wolf this morning, she lost one of her 4 paws." And the fox dried a tear. "And now, what are you doing here?" he asked. "I am going to my papa." "And your golden sovereigns?" "I have them in my pocket," said Pinocchio. "And to think that they might become 2,000 tomorrow. Why don't you bury them in the field of miracles?" "Today it is impossible. I will go another day." "Another day will be too late," said the fox. "How far off is the field of miracles?" "Not 2 miles. Will you come with us?" Pinocchio could not resist any longer, and forgetting all about his poor old father, he went with the fox and the cat. After a while, the fox said to the puppet, "Here we are. Now stoop down, dig a hole in the ground, and put your gold pieces in it." When that was done, the fox said, "Now go to the canal, fetch some water, and water the ground where you sowed them." Pinocchio went to the canal, filled his shoes with water, poured it over the hole, and asked, "Is there anything else to be done?" "No," answered the fox. "We can go away now." When you return in 20 minutes, you will find branches loaded with money." Pinocchio thanked the fox and the cat and promised them a present. "Oh, we don't want presents," answered the rascals. It is enough for us to have taught you how to enrich yourself." Thus saying, they wished Pinocchio a good harvest and went away. He's digging his hole back up. There's a pretty bird. Pinocchio began to count the minutes one by one. When he thought it must be time, he returned to the field of miracles. His heart beat fast. As he arrived at the field, he saw nothing. He advanced another 100 steps. Still nothing. He went right up to where he had buried his sovereigns, and nothing. At that moment, he heard an explosion of laughter, and looking up, he saw a large parrot perched on a tree. "Why are you laughing?" asked Pinocchio in an angry voice. "I laugh at those simpletons who believe in all the foolish things that are told them." "Are you perhaps speaking of me?" "Yes, Pinocchio, of you, who are simple enough to believe that money can be sown in fields like beans." "I don't understand you," said the puppet, who was trembling with fear. "I will explain it to you," replied the parrot. "While you were away from the field, the fox and the cat returned, took the buried money, and fled like the wind." Not believing the parrot, Pinocchio dug up the earth that he had watered. He dug and dug and dug, but the money was no longer there. You can imagine Pinocchio's sorrow when he found himself robbed. Immediately he left the field and took the road to the fairy's house. While Pinocchio was still drying his tears, a pigeon who was larger than a turkey flew over him and asked, "What are you doing here?" "Don't you see? I am crying," answered the puppet, embarrassed. Well, that is a big pigeon. "I have come to bring you to your father," said the pigeon. At those words, Pinocchio jumped for joy. The pigeon told Pinocchio how worried old Geppetto had been after he had left the house. The poor man had been tramping everywhere, looking for his naughty son. At the moment he was building a little boat for himself to cross the ocean. If they wanted to catch up with him, they had to be quick. So Pinocchio jumped on the pigeon's back, and in a few minutes the bird had soared so high that he almost touched the clouds. They flew all day and night, and the following day they reached the seashore. The pigeon placed the puppet on the ground and flew quickly away. The shore was crowded with people who were looking out to sea, shouting and gesticulating. "What happened?" Pinocchio asked an old woman. "A poor father has lost his son, and now he's going to search for him on the other side of the ocean, but the sea is stormy today, and the little boat is in danger of sinking." Pinocchio fixed his eyes on the little boat and suddenly gave a piercing scream. "It is my papa!" And without thinking twice, he jumped into the sea to save his papa. Being made of wood, he floated easily, and he swam like a fish. He hoped to be in time to help his father, and so he swam the whole night. It was a horrible night. The rain came down in torrents, it hailed, and the thunder was frightful. Toward morning, Pinocchio saw a long strip of land. Fortunately, a wave rolled up with fury and lifted him onto the shore. The puppet looked in every direction for the little boat, but he saw nothing. Pinocchio, who was very hungry by now, took a path leading inland, hoping to find something to eat. In about an hour, he reached a little village called the Village of the Industrious Bees. People were working everywhere, and there were no idlers or vagabonds. "Ah," said that lazy Pinocchio, "this village will never suit me. I wasn't born for work." In the meanwhile, however, he was tormented by hunger. There were only two ways by which he could obtain food, by either asking for work or by begging for a few pennies. Being Pinocchio, of course, he chose the latter, and he posted himself by the side of the road, asking charity of the passers-by. All they answered, "Aren't you ashamed to beg? Go and work to earn your bread instead of idling about the roads." At last it grew dark, and still poor Pinocchio had found nothing to eat. Finally, he decided to go to a little house that stood at the end of the village. Here he knocked at the door, and a sweet little woman opened it, asking him what he wanted. No sooner had Pinocchio looked at her than he shouted joyfully, and he jumped up and gave her 2 big kisses on both cheeks. For, you have certainly guessed it already, the sweet woman was no one else but the beautiful fairy. "You little rogue, how did you discover me?" "It was my great affection for you that told me." "But do you remember?" asked the fairy. "You left me while I was a child, and now I am a woman almost old enough to be your mamma." "I am delighted," said Pinocchio, "for now, instead of calling you little sister, I will call you mamma. But how did you manage to grow so fast?" "That is a secret." "Teach it to me, for I should like to grow too. I always remain no bigger than a 9-pin." "But you cannot grow. Puppets never grow." "I am sick and tired of being a puppet. I want to become a man." "You only will be one when you know how to deserve it." "And what can I do to deserve it?" "A very easy thing, by learning to be a good boy." "And you think I am not?" "On the contrary, good boys are obedient and study, and instead I am a vagabond," sighed Pinocchio. "Good boys willingly go to school, and school gives me pain all over my body, but from today on I will change my life. Do you promise me?" "I promise you. I will become a good boy." "Then from now on I will be your mamma." "Oh, how wonderful!" shouted Pinocchio. The following day Pinocchio went to school. Imagine the delight of all the little boys when they saw a puppet walk into their classroom. There's the parrot. Oh, he has an apple. They started to roar with laughter. One of the boys stretched out his hand to seize the puppet's long nose, but Pinocchio stuck out his leg and gave the boy, who started to scream loudly, a great kick. By this action, Pinocchio gained at once the respect of all the boys in school, and they all made friends with him. And even the master praised him, because he found that Pinocchio was an attentive and intelligent student. At the examinations before the holidays, he was the first in his class. This pleased the fairy very much, and she promised Pinocchio that the very next day he would no longer be a wooden puppet, but would become a real boy. You can imagine Pinocchio's joy. To celebrate this happy event, the fairy told him to invite all his schoolfellows to her house for the next day. However, he had to promise her that he would be back before dark. "Take care, Pinocchio," the fairy warned him. "Boys are always quick to promise, but seldom keep to their word." "I shall never make such a mistake again," he promised. "We shall see if that is true," sighed the fairy, who knew the little puppet only too well. So Pinocchio went out, dancing and singing. In less than an hour he had invited all his friends except a boy who went by the nickname of Candlewick. Although Candlewick was the laziest and naughtiest boy in school, Pinocchio admired him very much. So when he could not find Candlewick at home, he looked everywhere until he finally discovered him hiding by the roadside. "What are you doing here?" asked Pinocchio. "I am waiting for midnight," answered Candlewick. "Why, where are you going?" "I'm going to live in the most wonderful country in the world." "What country is that?" "It is the land of boobies. Why don't you come with me?" "I? No, never. If you do not come, you will repent it. There are no schools, no masters, and no books. Every week consists of 6 Saturdays and 1 Sunday, and the days are spent in playing and fun. What do you think of that?" Said Pinocchio. "I would love that." "Well, make up your mind. Go with me." "No, no, no. I promised my mamma to be home before dark and to become a good boy, and I will keep my word." Oh my. "So I must leave now. Goodbye and a pleasant journey." "Wait!" cried Candlewick. "And if the fairy scolds me?" "Let her scold," said that rascal Candlewick. "Are you going alone?" asked Pinocchio, who itched with curiosity. "No," answered Candlewick. "There will be more than 100 boys, and we will go in a coach that will pass by shortly." "But now," continued Pinocchio, "are you sure that there are no schools in that country?" "Not even the shadow of one." "What a wonderful country!" Pinocchio sighed. "But are you quite sure that all the weeks consist of 6 Saturdays and 1 Sunday?" "Completely sure." "What a wonderful country!" In the meantime, night had come and it was dark. Suddenly they saw a small light moving in the distance, and they heard the noise of talking and the sound of a trumpet. "It is the coach coming to take me," shouted Candlewick. At last the coach arrived. It was drawn by 12 pairs of donkeys who, instead of being shod like other beasts of burden, had men's boots on their feet. The coachman was a little man, flabby and greasy like a lump of butter. As soon as the coach had drawn up, Candlewick leapt on it. "And you, my love," said the little man to Pinocchio, "are you coming with us?" "Come with us, we shall have lots of fun," shouted 100 voices from inside the coach. Pinocchio sighed and finally said, "I'm coming too." But there was no room in the coach, so Pinocchio mounted one of the donkeys, and the coach started off. Look at all the donkeys. That poor donkey struggling. The donkey has a tear in his eye. That's a very sad donkey. While the donkeys were galloping and the coach was rattling over the stones of the high road, Pinocchio heard a voice. "Poor fool, you would have your own way, but you will repent it." Almost frightened, Pinocchio looked up to see where those words came from, but he saw nobody. The donkeys galloped, the coach rattled, and the boys inside slept. After a mile, Pinocchio heard the same voice again. "Bear in mind, simpleton, when you refuse to study, you come to a bad end. I speak from experience." Imagine Pinocchio's surprise when he found that it was the donkey which spoke, and that it was crying at the same time. "Sir Coachman," cried Pinocchio to the little man, "this donkey is crying." "Let it cry," shouted back the coachman, "and don't waste my time. The night is cold and the road is long." At those warning words, Pinocchio did not dare to speak again, and the coach went on through the night. In the morning, about daybreak, they arrived in the land of boobies. This is a country unlike any other country in the world. There were only boys, and in the streets there was such noise and shouting that it was enough to deafen anybody. Troops of boys ran everywhere. Some were playing ball, others rode bicycles. A group was playing at hide and seek, while other boys were chasing each other. There were theaters in every square, crowded with boys all the time. You get free toys, free candy, free ice cream, a donut eating contest. Gosh, amidst all the games and pleasures, the hours, the days, and the weeks passed like lightning. "Oh, what a wonderful country," said Pinocchio whenever by chance he met Candlewick. "See, wasn't I right?" replied Candlewick. This delightful life had gone on in this way for 5 months, without a thought of books or school, when one morning Pinocchio awoke to a most disagreeable surprise. Oh no! What happened? Oh dear. Well, what was this surprise? Well, I will tell you what happened. When Pinocchio one good morning awoke and got out of bed, he suddenly began, in spite of himself, to run around the room on his hands and feet. And as he ran, imagine his horror, his hands became hoofs, his face lengthened into a muzzle, and his back became covered with light gray hair. But the most humiliating thing was when he grew a tail. Overcome with shame and sorrow, he wept and lamented his fate. Oh, if he had only been wiser! But instead of sobs, he could only bray loudly, saying, "Hee-haw, hee-haw." While this was going on, there was a knock on the door. "Open the door! I am the little coachman who brought you to the land of boobies. Open at once!" And the little man burst into the room. "Well done, my boy, you brayed well. I recognized you by your voice. That is why I'm here." And he took a halter, which he put round Pinocchio's neck. With many other sadly braying donkeys, he led Pinocchio to the marketplace. And now you will understand what fine trade that little man pursued. Collecting with promises and flattery all the idle boys that refused to go to school, he brought them to the land of boobies. And then these boys, from playing and idling, had become dumb little donkeys. And then he carried them off to sell them at the fairs and markets. Pinocchio was sold to the director of a company of buffoons and tightrope dancers, who expected him to leap and dance with other animals belonging to the company. Now poor Pinocchio had to learn all kinds of things. It took him 3 months before he learned them, and he got many whippings that nearly took his hide off. At last the day came when his master was able to announce that Pinocchio would give an extraordinary performance. Oh, they've dressed him up. Look, he's got flowers all over him. He looks very confused. Halfway through the show, Pinocchio appeared on the scene. He had a new bridle with brass buckles and 2 white camellias in his ears. He bowed to the audience, which was crowded with boys and girls of all ages, and they all cheered for him. The donkey performed all the little tricks perfectly until he had to jump through a hoop. He brayed miserably each time that he came in front of the hoop, and instead of going through it, he found it easier to go under it. At last he made a desperate leap and went through it, but his legs caught in the hoop so that he fell to the ground on the other side. When he got up, he was lame, and it was only with great difficulty that he managed to return to the stable. "Bring out Pinocchio! We want Pinocchio!" shouted all the boys and girls in the theater, but the donkey was seen no more. The director scolded Pinocchio for his failure to jump through the hoop, and he ordered the stable boy to go to the market and to sell that worthless animal to the skinner, for he did not want a lame donkey in his theater. At the market, Pinocchio was sold to a man who wanted the donkey for his hide. This one conducted the frightened donkey to the seashore, and in order to kill him, he put a stone around his neck. Then he tied a rope around Pinocchio's leg, the end of which he held in his hand, and threw him in the water with a sudden push. Pinocchio went at once to the bottom. His owner, keeping hold of the cord, sat down quietly to wait until Pinocchio was drowned so that he could skin him. After Pinocchio had been under water long enough, the man began to haul in the rope until at last, what do you think appeared above the water? Instead of a little dead donkey, he saw a live puppet who was wriggling like an eel. Now what do you think had happened? Well, as soon as the good fairy saw that her little Pinocchio was drowning, she sent an immense shoal of fish who began to eat the donkey until they reached the bone, or rather the wood. But as soon as they came upon the wood, they stopped and went off. At that moment, the skinner hauled the rope, and you can imagine his amazement. He thought that he was the object of a bad joke and started to rage and threaten. Pinocchio, who in the meantime had unfastened the rope, did not wait until the man calmed down, but dived into the water. Swimming gaily away, he called to his poor owner, "Goodbye, master. If you should want a skin, remember me." And in the twinkling of an eye, he had disappeared. When Pinocchio had been swimming for a long time, he saw a rock in the sea that seemed to be made of white marble. On the summit there stood a beautiful goat who bleated longingly and made signs to him to approach. Yet the strangest thing was that her hair was of a very vivid blue. I leave you to imagine how rapidly Pinocchio's heart began to beat. He was already halfway there when he saw, rising out of the water, the horrible head of a giant dogfish. Pinocchio tried to avoid the terrible creature, but the monster's immense mouth came toward him with frightening speed. "Be quick, Pinocchio," bleated the beautiful little goat. Pinocchio swam faster than ever. He had nearly reached the rock where the little goat stood stretching out her forelegs to help him out of the water. But it was too late. The monster had overtaken the poor puppet and swallowed him down with such violence that, falling into the dogfish's stomach, he received a blow that left him unconscious for nearly 15 minutes. When he came to himself, he began to grope his way through the body of the dogfish in the direction of a light that he saw shining dimly at a great distance. The farther he advanced, the brighter it became, until at last he reached it. Who's that? There's something going on in that dogfish's stomach that looks kind of familiar. Here, he found a little table and a little old man seated at it eating some fish. As he saw this, Pinocchio became almost delirious with joy. Opening his arms, he threw them around the old man's neck and cried, "Oh, my dear papa, I have found you at last. I will never leave you again." "Then my eyes don't lie?" said the old man, rubbing his eyes. "Then you are really my dear Pinocchio?" "Yes, yes, I am Pinocchio, really Pinocchio." And then the puppet told his father all his adventures and the misfortunes he had met with. After he finished, Geppetto said, "And now I will tell you what happened to me. In the same storm in which my boat was upset, a merchant vessel went to the bottom. The dogfish, who had a good appetite that day, swallowed not only me, but also the vessel, which was loaded with all sorts of supply. So I've been able to live for a long time, but I have arrived at the end of my resources, and this candle here is the last of my remains." "Well then, dear papa, we must escape at once." "Escape? And how?" "We must throw ourselves through the mouth of the dogfish and swim away," said Pinocchio. "But I don't know how to swim," exclaimed the old man. "What does that matter? You can get on my shoulders and I will carry you safely to the shore." Without another word, Pinocchio took the candle in his hand and said to his father, "Follow me and don't be afraid." They walked for some time through the body and the stomach of the dogfish until they arrived at the monster's big throat. The dogfish, who was very old, suffered from asthma and therefore slept with his mouth open. Pinocchio looked up and saw a large piece of sky and beautiful moonlight. They immediately climbed up the throat, and having reached the creature's immense mouth, they walked on tiptoe down his tongue. As soon as Geppetto was firmly settled on his son's shoulders, Pinocchio threw himself into the water and began to swim. The dogfish was sleeping so profoundly that nothing could have awakened him. After a long time, Pinocchio, with his father on his back, finally reached the shore. Soaking wet and exhausted, they threw themselves onto the sand where they remained for a long time, unable to move. In the meantime, the rising sun dried the shivering father and son. After a long rest, they decided to get up and take to the road, in search of a mouthful of bread and some straw to serve as a bed. They had not gone 100 yards when they saw, by the roadside, two odd characters begging. They were the fox and the cat, who were scarcely recognizable. The cat had so long feigned blindness that she had really become blind, and the fox, with one side paralyzed, had not even his tail left. "Oh, Pinocchio," cried the fox, "give a little charity to two poor and infirm people." "Impostors," answered the puppet. "You took me in once, but you will never catch me again." And Pinocchio and Geppetto went their way in peace. After a while, at the end of a path, they saw a pretty little hut with a roof of red tiles, and they knocked at the door. "Who is there?" came a little voice from within. "We are a poor father and son," answered Geppetto. "Turn the key and the door will open," said the voice. Pinocchio turned the key and the door opened. "Where is the master?" asked the puppet, surprised. "Here, I am up here." Father and son both looked up at the ceiling, and on a beam they saw the talking cricket. "Oh, my dear little cricket!" exclaimed Pinocchio. Ah, now you call me your dear little cricket. But do you remember that you threw a hammer at me? You are right, Cricket, answered Pinocchio regretfully. Drive me away, then. I have pity on you, but I wanted to remind you of the ill treatment I received. I will bear in mind the lesson you have given me, but tell me how you managed to buy this wonderful hut. It was given to me yesterday by a beautiful blue goat. And where has the goat gone? Asked Pinocchio. I don't know, answered the cricket. Pinocchio sighed sadly and started to prepare a bed for the exhausted Geppetto. He asked the cricket where he could find a tumbler of milk for his father, and the cricket sent him to a farmer who kept cows. Pinocchio ran all the way to the farmer's house to ask for some milk, but as soon as the farmer learned that the puppet did not have a penny to pay him with, he refused to give him any milk. When Pinocchio turned away sadly, the farmer suddenly proposed a deal to the puppet. If he would draw 100 buckets of water out of the well to water the vegetables, he would get a tumbler of milk in return. It is a bargain, said Pinocchio, and started to work at once. From that day on, he continued to get up at daybreak every morning to earn the milk that was necessary for his sick father. For the rest of the time, he worked hard to make baskets that he sold in the marketplace. In this way, he managed to provide for the daily expenses of his father and himself. One day, he went to bed and fell asleep, tired from his hard work. While he slept, he dreamed that he saw the beautiful fairy who said to him, "Well done, Pinocchio. To reward you for your good heart and your hard labor, I forgive you for all that is past. Be a good boy in the future, and you will be happy." When Pinocchio awoke in the morning, imagine his astonishment when he discovered that he had become a real boy. He looked at himself in the glass, and instead of a wooden puppet, he saw the image of a bright boy with chestnut hair and blue eyes. He jumped for joy and exclaimed, "Where is my papa?" Going into the next room, he found old Geppetto completely recovered and in good humor. Pinocchio threw his arms around his neck and cried, "How did this sudden change come about?" "This change is all your own doing," said Geppetto. "How so? My doing?" asked the astonished Geppetto. "Yes, all your doing," answered Geppetto. When boys who behave badly become good, they bring happiness and contentment to themselves and their families. And where did the old wooden Pinocchio hide himself? There he is, and Geppetto pointed to a big puppet leaning against a chair, with its head on one side, its arms dangling, and its legs crossed and bent. Pinocchio turned and looked at it, and then he said, "How ridiculous I was when I was a puppet, and how glad I am that I have become a well-behaved real boy." And that is the end of the Adventures of Pinocchio. He certainly went through a lot. From where he started, he came a long way. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this story. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you again really soon.